everybody, and welcome back to another video with 2BeLikeChrist. I wanted to actually make a parenthesis to our study in the Gospel of Matthew today. Before we go into that, let me also say that I'm going to bring the camera back eventually. Right now, I've taken it away, but I think it's much more interesting to be able to talk to you directly rather than just you staring at my iPad screen for these entire studies. So I'm going to bring that back. Today I wanted to make a parenthesis in our study. As I was going through the first couple chapters of the book of Matthew, I was noticing a trend about who God was using to bring him glory versus who Satan was using to bring him glory. And I wanted to see if that pattern I saw in the first 3 chapters or so was consistent throughout the book of Matthew, and I found that it was pretty consistent. And so I want to share that with you. I think it's a good way to kind of get it to pick out a theme that flows through the entire book rather than just camping on one text. So here it is. Look at that first point that I have here written. Satan sets out in the book of Matthew, in chapter 4, to obtain all authority for himself by tempting Jesus. In Matthew chapter 4, Satan tempts Jesus in the wilderness 3 times. One of his temptations is to try to get Jesus to bow down to him, and he's got all these cities and nations of the world that he's going to give to Jesus because Satan wants authority over Jesus, and he tempts him with various things. And so that's his goal throughout all the book. He wants all authority and he wants all power. Throughout the book, look at the second point there. Throughout the book, he used all the people who you would expect to be able to bring him glory. Let me explain that. All the people who would have been admired by men of that day for their power. So, if you wanted to even in our culture, if you want to get something done, you go to the most important man that you have a connection with, right? He's the one who can get everything going, that can get you the things you desire, because he has the most resources, he has the most influence, whatever. Satan really does that exact same thing. He wants glory, and he goes to the people who you would expect him to go to get him that glory. Let's take a look at these people. So, let's see. People that Satan used for his glory. The first one is the inadequate kings of Israel. We talked about in chapter 1 that all these kings kind of fell short and didn't do the job as well as they should have, and they could never be the king that Jesus is going to be. But Satan used them, and he tried to bring down the Jewish nation, and he tried to bring down the line of David, and he tried to bring down Christ in that method, and he used these men of great influence to do that. In chapter 2, we read about Satan using Herod the Great. Herod the Great's the one who kills all the children, and we'll get into that in our next lesson in Matthew. He uses the Sadducees, he uses the Pharisees, he uses the scribes. These are the highest authorities of Jewish law in Jerusalem, and very respected men. The people would have looked up to them as an authority on Moses' law. He also uses Herod the Tetrarch, Herodias, and Herodias' daughter. So this is royal blood, and he uses them to kill John the Baptist, and he uses them for just evil means, right? But men of authority to bring about his will. He uses the tradition of the elders, not the written scriptures, but these traditions that these elders had told the people that they had to follow. And the elders being respected, which is our next one, the elders being very respected, those traditions would have been very authoritative. Let's continue down this list here. He uses the chief priests. He uses Caesar. One of the tricks that they try to pull on Jesus is a trick about, should we give our tribute money to Caesar or not, right? So that he brings him into that to try to get Jesus down. There's a crowd with swords and clubs. Men see power in numbers and in weapons. They always have. Satan used that when Jesus was in the garden to arrest him. Caiaphas, the high priest, the person who should have been on Jesus' side more than anybody, the high priest office, obviously, was just about the highest position in Jewish culture, and Caiaphas was very much against Jesus and on Satan's side. Roman soldiers to beat Jesus, to arrest Jesus. Pilate, the Roman ambassador or the Roman governor over that region, sides with Satan, and Satan uses him to try to bring Jesus down. And a military guard at the tomb. Jesus, even after he was dead, was guarded by military strength to keep him in the ground. So all these people are they're all in Matthew, and they're all very important people. They're all very authoritative people. And this is who Satan uses to bring about his glory on the earth. Now, I want to look at who Jesus uses to bring about his glory. And what you'll find is that it's a significantly different list. And then we'll see the final outcome and who ultimately gets the authority and gets the power. Who does Jesus use, and who does God use? I've been cut off. Who does God use to bring about his will? We find that he uses Mary and he uses Joseph. These are nobodies, right? No one knows who these people are. They're not significant or great in anyone's eyes. He uses John the Baptist. Again, not really anybody significant, not really from a significant family. He uses the centurion's paralyzed servant to show his power. He uses Peter's sick mother-in-law. He uses a demon-possessed man named Legion. He uses a paralytic, fishermen, uneducated people, a tax collector, somebody that everybody hated, rulers. There's a ruler, and his daughter was dead, and Jesus actually raises her from the dead. A woman with an issue of blood, 2 blind men, 5 loaves and 2 fish to feed thousands. There's a Canaanite woman who wasn't respected by the Jews, and he casts out a demon that was possessing her daughter. 7 loaves and a few small fish, again, to feed thousands of people. A man with a demon-possessed son. He uses children to talk about his glory and the way that he wants his followers to be. 2 more blind men. He then takes on this attitude of a suffering servant and dies for the world. And then his resurrection is witnessed by 2 women. And 2 women's testimony in those days was counted as almost worthless. Only a man's testimony was really worth anything. And so this is what Jesus uses to witness to the most important event in history. I mean, this is the point. And against all of these odds, Matthew chapter 28, verse 18, which is almost the last scripture in the whole gospel, concludes like this. Here's the question. Who ended up with the glory? Was it Satan getting it, beginning in Matthew chapter 4, using all these powerful people to get it? The answer is no. Jesus, Matthew 28, 18, Jesus ends up saying, all authority in heaven and on earth are mine. God has given me all authority in heaven and on earth. Funny how that works out, isn't it? Funny the power of God to use people who may not be greatly respected in the eyes of the world to bring about the greatest plan in eternity. And I think there's definitely a lesson there for us that we may not be someone great. We may not be somebody who people look up to or think is significant. We may have weaknesses, and there's great reason to rejoice in those weaknesses so that our strength is not dependent on us. Our effectiveness for the kingdom is not dependent on us, but our strength comes from God. In 2 Corinthians, Paul sums this up so beautifully in this passage that many of us know and that you hear quite often. Paul says, "My grace is sufficient for you." That's God speaking to Paul. "My grace is sufficient to you, for my power is made perfect in weakness." Paul says, "Therefore I will boast all the more gladly for my weaknesses, so that the power of Christ may rest upon me. For the sake of Christ, then, I am content with weakness, insults, hardship, persecution, and calamity. For when I am weak, then I am strong."